All right, let's just jump right into this. Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we are completely tearing down the illusion of system security to look at something that's absolutely fascinating and honestly, a little bit terrifying. We're talking about Linux kernel exploits. We're going to break down exactly how attackers take seemingly harmless, low-level access and spin it into total, completely invisible system takeover. Now, there is this massive misconception floating around the tech world. You might have heard it. The idea is, hey, as long as I avoid root logins and secure my administrator account, my Linux system is totally locked down and safe. Well, I'm here to tell you right now that is a dangerous, dangerous myth. Because here's the reality check. When hackers breach a system, their first step is almost never as the root user. I mean, that would just be too easy, right? Instead, they usually sneak in as an ordinary, unprivileged user. Just a totally normal account. But the real danger, the actual threat we're unpacking today, is all about how those totally normal accounts can be weaponized if the underlying system has a flaw. So let's start with Section 1, the privilege escalation threat. To really get inside the mind of an attacker, you have to understand their main objective once they're through the door. There are basically two paths they can take. First, you've got horizontal privilege escalation. Think of this like just walking down the hall. You're moving sideways to access another normal user's files. It's bad, but it's not game over. But then there's vertical privilege escalation. This is the ultimate prize. This is starting at the bottom as a restricted user and climbing straight up to become root, the all-powerful administrator. And the absolute most lethal way they pull off this vertical climb by attacking the kernel itself. Which brings us to Section 2. Anatomy of kernel exploits. Why the kernel, right? Why is a bug here so much worse than anywhere else? Well, the Linux kernel is literally the mechanical heart of the operating system. It lives in this exclusive privilege level called ring 0, which basically means it has absolute, unquestioned authority. It manages your memory, your file system, the network stack, every single system call. If an attacker breaches the kernel and gets into ring 0, they aren't just in your system anymore, they become the system. And because the kernel dictates what your security software is even allowed to see, they can completely blind your modern EDR tools. You wouldn't even know they were there. Okay, so how does a hacker actually pull this off in the real world? It's a very methodical playbook. Step 1, they get that tiny foothold. Maybe it's a buggy web app, a weak SSH password, whatever, just low privilege access. Step 2, they look around. They'll run a quick command, something like uname-a, just to see the exact version of the Linux kernel running on that machine. And then step 3 is where it gets scary. They take that version number, go to public vulnerability databases, and cross-reference it. They're looking for known CVEs, things like Dirty Pipe or Stacklash, that work specifically on that version. To give you a really clear picture of this, let's look at one of the most infamous exploits in history, Dirty Cow, CVE 2016-5195. This exploited a memory mechanism called copy on write. It was basically a race condition. By manipulating the exact microsecond timing of how memory was copied, an attacker with a 0 privileges could trick the kernel into overwriting files that were completely read-only. Think about the implications there. They could literally rewrite the system's password file, conjure a brand new root account out of thin air, and instantly upgrade to absolute control. Just like that. Moving right along to Section 3, Modern Container Escape Risks. Now I know what you might be thinking. Okay, Dirty Cow was 2016. Don't we all use containers now? Aren't we safe? We do, but the threat has just evolved. Today's Linux ecosystem is amazing, but all that power brings massive complexity. We've got features like eBPF, IOUring, OverlayFS, and the namespaces that actually run your containers. All of these have drastically expanded the surface area for attackers. Every new feature is a potential new backdoor. And this brings us to a huge takeaway for this explainer, so definitely pay attention to this one. Docker is not a magic security shield. People assume containers are these perfectly isolated little boxes. But here's the catch. They all share the exact same underlying host kernel. If that host kernel has a vulnerability, an attacker can use an exploit to just break right out of the container. We call this a container escape. They bust out of their sandbox and land directly on your main host machine as root. The isolation is literally just an illusion if the foundation underneath it is cracked. Which brings us to the terrifying reality of what happens when they win. Section 4, the root user endgame. The moment, and I mean the literal split second, an attacker gets root through the kernel, the devastation is incredibly fast. Their goal isn't just to snoop around, they want total, permanent ownership of your machine. They'll immediately kill your system logs to cover their tracks. They'll disable your security tools, so your IT team is sitting there looking at a dashboard full of green lights while the system burns. They install rootkits, steal SSH keys, scrape memory for passwords, spread to other servers, and eventually drop ransomware. And the worst part? Because they own the kernel, they can do all of this while making the server look totally healthy and normal to anyone checking on it. All right, Section 5, Mitigation and Patching Dilemmas.
So the obvious question everyone asks is, if it's this bad, why don't companies just patch their systems the second a bug is announced? Well, welcome to the Defender's absolute nightmare. It is so easy to say, just update it, but in a massive enterprise, updating the kernel is terrifying. You're dealing with what we call enterprise fears. Updating might cause driver incompatibilities. It could break VMware or completely shatter a massive Kubernetes cluster. And if you're in banking or telecom, you have zero downtime requirements. You literally cannot reboot that server without losing millions of dollars. So the crazy reality is there are countless critical servers out there right now intentionally running outdated, vulnerable kernels.
So what do we do? Since 100% prevention is basically impossible, defense is all about layering your risk reduction. Yes, patch when you realistically can, but beyond that, you have to apply the principle of least privilege. Use security modules like SE Linux or AppArmor to put limits on what even the root user can actually do. Isolate those containers as best as you can. And crucially, you need modern eBPF monitoring tools. You can't just look for known bad files anymore. You have to watch for the behavior of an exploit. Things like weird system calls, sudden privilege changes, or random kernel crashes that tell you someone is messing with a memory. Finally, let's look at what's coming next in Section 6, the AI exploit era. The rules of this whole cat and mouse game, they are about to be completely rewritten. Historically, writing one of these kernel exploits was like an artisan craft. It took elite researchers months of work. But what happens when AI learns how to hunt for these vulnerabilities automatically? What happens when AI drastically lowers the barrier to entry for this kind of attack? We're not just guessing here. AI capabilities are accelerating right now. We are heading straight into a world where an AI model can just ingest decades of CVE data, scan through millions of lines of kernel source code in seconds, and find those deeply hidden memory bugs that humans just glossed over. And it gets worse. It's starting to be able to generate automated exploit prototypes. We're moving from a world of very manual, highly targeted attacks to an era of automated AI-driven vulnerability hunting on a massive scale. And that brings us to this incredibly profound and frankly, super unsettling realization. When a hacker gets root, the Linux you see might already not be your Linux. Think about that for a second. Because the kernel controls reality for your operating system, a compromised kernel means every piece of data, every log file, every single thing you look at on your screen could be a complete lie, completely fabricated by the attacker. Once they own the kernel, they own your reality, which begs a pretty massive question. Exactly how do they manipulate the system to stay completely invisible for months or sometimes even years? Well, that is exactly what we're going to uncover in our next explainer, where we dive into the dark arts of Linux rootkits and how they hide in plain sight. Until then, keep learning, stay focused, and I'll catch you in the next one.